The guard's voice, sharp and laced with disdain, cut through the solemn morning air. He stood with his arms crossed, a human barricade in a crisp dress uniform, blocking the grand entrance to Arlington National Cemetery. His partner, a man of similar youth and arrogance, smirked beside him. Before them stood Henry Lawson. At 87, his frame was stooped, his hands weathered by time, and his face a road map of a life lived long and hard. He wore a simple dark suit, frayed at the cuffs but impeccably clean. It was the only one he owned. He didn't flinch at the guard's question. His gaze, clear and steady, remained fixed on the green hills beyond the gate where the flags flew at half-mast. He said nothing, his silence a stark contrast to the guard's aggressive posture. The younger guard stepped forward, his polished shoes crunching on the gravel. "Guard, sir, this is a private funeral for General Wallace. Invitation only. I need to see your credentials or you need to leave." The confrontation hung in the air, a sour note in a place dedicated to honor. The guard was a wall of rules and regulations. Seeing only a confused old man who had wandered into the wrong place, he couldn't see the history standing before him. The living testament to the very values the cemetery was built to commemorate. The tension began to coil tight and dangerous as more cars, long black sedans with government plates, began to arrive, their occupants casting curious, pitying glances at the old man being held at the gate. Henry simply waited. He had waited through worse. The younger guard, whose name tag read Jennings, sighed with theatrical impatience. "Jennings, look, Grandpa, I don't have time for this. The motorcade is arriving soon. You're creating a security issue. If you want to visit a grave, the public entrance is a mile that way. Now, are you going to move along or do we have to make you?" Henry's voice, when it came, was quiet but carried a surprising weight, like stones worn smooth by a river. "Henry, I'm here for the general. He would have wanted me here." The second guard, Corporal Davis, let out a short, humorless laugh. "Davis, right, you and the general best pals, I'm sure, sir. With all due respect, General Wallace was a four-star. He advised presidents. He didn't have time for people without an invitation." The insult was clear, wrapped in a thin veneer of formal address. A small crowd of mourners had started to gather at a respectful distance, their curiosity piqued by the standoff. They were a collection of high-ranking military officers, somber-faced politicians, and grieving family members, all dressed in formal black. Their whispers were a low hum beneath the guard's sharp tones. Henry could feel their eyes on him, a mixture of pity, annoyance, and embarrassment. It was a familiar feeling. He had spent a lifetime being underestimated, being invisible. It was, for the most part, a role he preferred, but not today, not here. "Henry Lawson, my name is Henry Lawson." Jennings took a step closer, his personal space violation deliberate and intimidating. "Jennings, Henry Lawson. Okay, and I'm the Secretary of Defense. Names don't mean anything without the right paperwork, old-timer." He pointed a gloved finger at Henry's chest. "You have no medals on your suit, no ribbons, no proof of service. As far as I'm concerned, you're a civilian trespassing on federal property during a restricted event." The accusation hung in the air. No proof of service. Henry's hand subconsciously drifted to his side, where he could feel the phantom weight of things long since discarded, of burdens carried and set down. He had proof, just not the kind that could be polished and pinned to a lapel. His proof was etched into his bones, carved into his memory. A junior officer, a crisp second lieutenant with a face too young for the bars on his shoulders, strode over from a nearby security checkpoint, drawn by the commotion. "Lieutenant, what's the holdup, Corporal Davis?" "This man, sir," he said, gesturing toward Henry, "refuses to leave, claims he's a friend of General Wallace. No invitation, no credentials." The lieutenant looked Henry up and down, his gaze lingering on the worn fabric of his suit and the scuffed toes of his shoes. His assessment was swift and dismissive. "Lieutenant, sir, you are disrupting a state funeral. I am giving you one final order to vacate the premises immediately." Henry's patience, a reservoir deep and vast, was finally beginning to run dry. "Henry, I'm not leaving." The lieutenant's face hardened. "Lieutenant, then you are under arrest for trespassing and interfering with a military ceremony." He nodded to the guards. "Escort him out. If he resists, cuff him." As Jennings and Davis moved to put their hands on Henry's arms, the lieutenant noticed something on the old man's lapel. It was a small, dull piece of metal, no bigger than a dime, pinned crookedly to the fabric. It was misshapen, tarnished, and looked utterly worthless. The lieutenant sneered, reaching out and flicking it with his finger. "Lieutenant, what's this supposed to be, your special prize from the Cracker Jack box?" The moment the lieutenant's finger touched the metal, the world dissolved. The manicured lawns of Arlington vanished, replaced by the sucking mud and torrential rain of a jungle half a world away. The air, once filled with the scent of cut grass, was now thick with the metallic tang of blood and cordite. The muffled sobs of the mourners became the desperate screams of wounded men. A young captain, his face smeared with grime and fear, lay pinned under a fallen banyan tree, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. That young captain was Andrew Wallace. He was trying to hand a piece of jagged metal still warm to a young Henry Lawson. His hands, covered in his own blood, trembled. Andrew Wallace, keep this, Henry, it's not regulation. It's not official, but it means more than any metal they'll ever mint. It means you were there, it means you saved us. The vision shattered. Henry was back at the gate, the sun bright in his eyes. The lieutenant was still smirking, oblivious. But something had shifted in Henry's expression. A flicker of fire from a long-banked ember now burned in his eyes. He gently pushed the lieutenant's hand away from the pin. Henry, don't touch that. The escalation had reached its peak. The guards, emboldened by their officer, grabbed Henry's frail arms. The small crowd gasped. The humiliation was absolute, a public shaming of a man whose only crime was wanting to say goodbye to a friend. But not everyone in the crowd was merely watching. Standing near the back was a young Army captain, Ethan Hayes. He had been observing the entire exchange with a growing unease. He had served 2 tours overseas and had seen enough to recognize the quiet, unbreakable stillness of a true combat veteran. It was in the way the old man stood, the way he absorbed the insults without flinching. The way his eyes seemed to look straight through the chaos in front of him. Something was profoundly wrong. When the guards put their hands on Henry, Captain Hayes knew he couldn't stand by. Direct intervention was impossible. It would be a career-ending mess of insubordination and jurisdictional chaos. But he could make a call. He discreetly pulled his phone from his pocket, his thumb flying across the screen. He had a number, a direct line to a man who had been General Wallace's right-hand man for 20 years, Colonel Markinson. He moved away from the crowd, turning his back to shield the call. Captain Hayes, sir, it's Captain Hayes. There's an incident at the main gate. Security is detaining an elderly man trying to get in. Markinson's sigh was audible. And this requires my attention? Why, let security handle it, son. They have their orders. Hayes added the detail that had been nagging at him. Captain Hayes, sir, he's wearing a small tarnished pin on his lapel. It looks like a piece of shrapnel. A sudden deafening silence followed on the other end of the line. The kind of silence that speaks louder than any shout. The ambient noise of the command post, the radio chatter, the shuffling papers all faded away. Captain Hayes held his breath. When Colonel Markinson's voice returned, it was completely transformed. The annoyance was gone, replaced by a raw and naked urgency that made the hair on Hayes's neck stand up. Colonel Markinson. Captain, what did you say his name was? Captain Hayes. Henry Lawson, sir. The line went dead. Hayes looked up just in time to see the guards beginning to drag Henry away from the gate toward a waiting security vehicle. He was too late. Inside a command tent set up 100 yards from the ceremony, Colonel Markinson stared at his phone as if it had electrocuted him. He slammed it down on the table, his face ashen. An aide looked up startled. Aide. Sir, is everything all right? Colonel Markinson, get me General Peters. The aide was back holding a radio handset. I have General Peters, sir. Markinson snatched the radio. General, this is Markinson. We have a code shepherd at the main gate. I repeat, code shepherd is active. The radio crackled. The voice of the highest-ranking active duty officer in attendance, 4-star General Michael Peters, came through, stripped of all ceremony. General Peters, say again, Colonel, that's not possible. Colonel Markinson, it's him, sir, the description matches. The pin, the name, it's Henry Lawson, and security is in the process of arresting him. The response was instantaneous and glacial. General Peters, halt everything, halt the procession, I'm on my way. Back at the gate, the young lieutenant was savoring his victory. He had restored order, he had removed the nuisance. He leaned against the stone pillar, watching with a smug expression as his men manhandled the old veteran. He decided to deliver one final crushing blow to the old man's dignity. He walked over to Henry, who stood between the 2 guards, his shoulders slumped not in defeat but in a profound, weary sadness. The lieutenant got right in his face, his voice dripping with condescension. Lieutenant. Last chance, old man. You can walk away from here with your pride, what's left of it, or you can spend the rest of General Wallace's funeral in a holding cell. We'll charge you, and I'll personally recommend a full psychiatric evaluation. A man your age with your delusions, you're a danger to yourself and a public embarrassment. His words were a final twist of the knife. He had pushed a man of honor past the breaking point of humiliation, and in doing so had crossed a line from which there was no return. It started as a low rumble, a vibration felt more in the chest than heard with the ears. It was a sound wholly out of place in the quiet reverence of Arlington, every head turned, including the lieutenants. Cresting the hill was a motorcade of 3 black Chevrolet Suburbans, their tinted windows reflecting the morning sun like obsidian mirrors. They weren't moving with the slow, dignified pace of the funeral procession. They moved with the speed and terrifying purpose of a rapid response team. They screeched to a halt just feet from the gate, their tires spitting gravel. The lieutenant and his guards froze, their hands still on Henry. Doors flew open with military precision. Outstepped not military police but 6 men in immaculate army dress blues. They were sergeants, major colonels, men whose chests were heavy with so many ribbons and medals they clinked softly with every movement. Colonel Markinson was the first out, his face a mask of cold fury. Then the rear door of the lead vehicle opened and outstepped General Michael Peters. He was tall and imposing, 4 silver stars gleaming on each of his shoulders. The air itself seemed to grow still and heavy. The ambient noise of the cemetery, the wind in the trees, the distant traffic, the hushed whispers of the crowd all ceased. There was only the sight of this 4-star general, his presence sucking all the oxygen from the air. The lieutenant felt a cold dread wash over him. He and his men instinctively snapped to attention, their hands falling away from Henry as if he were suddenly radioactive. General Peters didn't spare the lieutenant or his guards a single glance. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, scanned the scene until they found what they were looking for. They landed on the stooped figure of Henry Lawson. The general's entire demeanor changed. The hard commanding aura dissolved, replaced by something else entirely, a look of profound, almost reverent respect. He began to walk, his polished boots marking a slow, deliberate rhythm on the pavement. He walked past the terrified lieutenant, past the stunned guards, past everyone, his path leading to one man and one man only. He stopped precisely 3 feet in front of Henry. In the dead silence, General Peters drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight. He raised his right hand to his brow, not in a casual gesture, but in the sharpest, most impeccably executed salute the lieutenant had ever witnessed. It was a salute of ultimate respect, a gesture acknowledging a difference from a 4-star general to a civilian in a threadbare suit. His voice, a command voice that had addressed armies and advised presidents, boomed across the grounds, clear and unwavering for all to hear. General Peters, Mr. Lawson, it is an honor, sir. The lieutenant, utterly bewildered, finally found his voice stammering. Lieutenant, General, sir, I apologize for the disturbance. This man, he was causing a scene. He had no authorization to be here. General Peters's head snapped toward the lieutenant. He didn't lower his salute, but his eyes drilled into the young officer, a glare so intense it felt like a physical blow. General Peters. He has more authorization to be on this ground than you or I will ever have, Lieutenant. Then, turning his attention slightly to address the entire now silent crowd, the general kept his hand fixed in his salute and began to speak. His voice was a resonant baritone carrying the weight of history. General Peters, for those of you who do not know, let me tell you who you are looking at. You see an old man, you see a civilian, but I see a giant. This is Henry Lawson. A collective gasp rolled through the crowd. The name spoken now was battlefield folklore. The general continued, his voice rising with passion. General Peters, to the history books that name means nothing. But to the men of the 5th Special Forces Group, to the first operators of Delta, and to the man we lay to rest today, General Andrew Wallace, he is a legend known by another name. The Shepherd, the name passed from mouth to mouth like a rumor turned fact. A piece of battlefield folklore had become flesh. General Peters, this man went into places that don't exist on any map to rescue men the government had written off as lost. He wasn't a soldier in the traditional sense. He was a medic, a pilot, a navigator, and when he had to be, a warrior of unmatched ferocity. He never wore a rank, he never accepted a commission. He refused every medal offered to him. He said the only reward he needed was seeing his boys come home. The general took a step closer to Henry, his eyes shining with unshed tears. He spoke of a spring night in 1968 when a helicopter carrying a dozen Green Berets was shot down deep in enemy territory. For 3 days they were surrounded, outnumbered 10-1 with no hope of extraction. General Peters, on the 3rd night a single man came for them. Through the jungle, through enemy patrols, came the Shepherd. He carried half of those men out on his back. Henry Lawson right here. He is the reason Andrew Wallace lived to become the man we honor today. The general finally lowered his salute, but his eyes never left Henry's. He gently pointed to the tarnished pin on Henry's lapel. General Peters, you see this piece of metal, this trinket you mistook for garbage. This is a piece of shrapnel from a mortar shell that landed 3 feet from Captain Wallace. Henry threw himself on top of Wallace, taking the blast that would have killed him. Wallace forged that piece of shrapnel into a pin himself, and he called it the Medal of Shepherds. It is the only one ever made. It is the highest honor a man like him could ever bestow. Vindication was total and absolute. The crowd was no longer staring with pity but with awe. The soldiers in attendance, from privates to colonels, began to slowly, one by one, raise their own hands in salute to the unassuming old man. The lieutenant's face drained of all color. He looked as though he might be physically ill. He and his guards had not just made a mistake, they had committed a sacrilege. General Peters finally turned his full attention to the lieutenant and the 2 guards. His voice dropped to a quiet, lethal register that was somehow more terrifying than his parade ground boom. General Peters. You asked him for his invitation. Let me be clear. Every single headstone on that hill is his invitation. Every flag flying at half-mast is his personal welcome. He took a step toward them and they flinched as if he had raised a hand. General Peters, you demanded to see his medals. Lieutenant, the scars on this man's body are a testament to a brand of courage your rulebook could never quantify. He wears his valor in his heart, not on his chest. Your job is security, but your most essential tool isn't your sidearm or your radio. It is judgment, it is discernment. And in that you have failed on a scale that is staggering. You stood in the presence of living history and saw nothing but a nuisance. You mistook a titan for a trespasser. The general's gaze was relentless. You will report to my aide. You will give him your names and your units, and you will be in my office at the Pentagon at 600 tomorrow morning for a conversation about the true meaning of respect. Is that understood? Jennings, Davis, Lieutenant. Yes, General. Just as the general was about to turn away, Henry, who had been silent through the entire ordeal, reached out and placed a gentle, weathered hand on the general's uniformed arm. Henry. Michael, he said, using the general's first name, they were just kids doing their job the only way they knew how. Let it be. The general looked down at Henry, his expression softened, he nodded slowly. Then Henry turned and looked directly at the young lieutenant. There was no anger in his eyes, only a deep, profound wisdom. Henry, son, that uniform you wear, it doesn't automatically grant you respect. It's a symbol, a promise. Respect is something you earn every single day by how you treat people. And you need to understand that sometimes the most important people, the ones who have sacrificed the most, wear no uniform at all. Just remember that. As Henry spoke those words, the memory of the pin's creation bloomed fully into view. It wasn't a chaotic flash this time, but a clear, poignant scene, a makeshift field hospital smelling of antiseptic and death. A young Henry lay on a cot, his back a bloody tapestry of shrapnel wounds. Beside him sat Captain Andrew Wallace, his own leg in a splint. In Wallace's hand was a jagged, ugly piece of metal pulled from Henry's own flesh just hours before. He pressed it into Henry's palm. Andrew Wallace, they're putting me in for a silver star for that mess, he said, voice thick with emotion. But it belongs to you, all of it. I don't know what I can give you that the Army will recognize. But I want you to have this, so you never forget the price, so I never forget the debt. The origin of the humble object was a story of sacrifice, a bond forged in fire and blood. General Peters personally escorted Henry through the gates, past the rows of saluting soldiers and the stunned, silent crowd. He led him not to a seat in the back, but to the very front row, placing him among General Wallace's grieving family. They had heard the stories of the shepherd their whole lives, and they embraced the old man with tears in their eyes, thanking him for giving them 50 more years with their beloved patriarch. Henry sat through the service, a quiet stoic figure, paying his final respects to his friend, his duty finally done. The fallout from the incident at the gate was swift and decisive. The lieutenant and his guards were not dishonorably discharged. Henry wouldn't have wanted that. Instead, General Peters personally oversaw their reassignment and mandatory retraining. He created a new program for all security personnel at sensitive military installations. A course in situational awareness, history, and empathy, designed to teach soldiers to look beyond the surface, to see the person, not just the uniform or lack thereof. The course became known throughout the armed forces as the Lawson Protocol. The story of the old man at the gate became a cautionary tale, a lesson in humility taught to every new recruit. Months passed. The seasons changed. The young lieutenant, now humbled and wiser, was manning a quiet checkpoint at a different base, far from the prestige of Arlington. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon, and he was taking his lunch break at a small greasy spoon diner just off post. As he sat stirring his coffee, the bell above the door jingled. An old man in a simple jacket walked in, shaking the rain from his shoulders, and took a seat at the counter. It was Henry Lawson. The officer's heart hammered in his chest. He watched as Henry ordered a coffee and sat staring out the window, lost in thought. For a long moment, the officer sat frozen, a war of shame and gratitude raging within him. Finally, he stood up. He walked over to the counter, took a $10 bill from his wallet and placed it down next to Henry's coffee cup. Henry looked up. His calm eyes showed a flicker of recognition. The officer couldn't bring himself to say much. His voice was thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "Officer, for the coffee, sir, and for the lesson, thank you." Henry looked at the young man, truly looked at him, and saw the change. He offered a small, knowing smile and a slight nod. "Henry. Stay safe, son." The officer nodded back, turned, and walked out of the diner, leaving the hero to his coffee, a silent and respectful understanding having passed between them. Henry Lawson's story reminds us that heroes don't always wear their greatness on their sleeves. If this story of quiet valor moved you, Please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to American Veterans Stories for more stories of the unassuming heroes who walk among us.